This month's Where Did the Road Go is sponsored by Allison Cook, Lindsay Trebet, and Super Inframan. If you'd like to help support the show, you can do so at wheredidtheroadgo.com. And now our show.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? Tonight, I have two different segments for you. Both are listener stories. Both are very different listener stories. So we're going to go right into the first one, and then the second one will follow in about an hour. So here you go. Tonight, I am joined by, again, Michael Parish and his father, Ted Parish. And Ted, you have some history about the house that Michael grew up in and some of your own views of the experiences that happened there.
Well, actually, the house he grew up in.
Oh, the house you grew up. Okay.
Yeah, we moved into the house in 1958. Just to give you a little background, my mother and father bought the house in 1958. At that time, I was 6 months old, and I have three older brothers. And throughout our early childhood, it was let me give a description. It was a big old house, built in 1890. It was built by a lumber company, actually, because in our hometown of Marinette, Wisconsin, at the turn of the century in 1900, it was a booming logging center. So, to give you some idea, around 1900, it had about 17,000 people. Today, it only has about, I think, a little over 10,000. So, supposedly, my cousin did some research, and there was a logging company that had built this house, and kind of showing off their wares, so to speak. And we know by its location that at the time it was built, it was the only house in that area, but it was a large house. So it was built in 1890, and it was sold multiple times, and then we moved in 1958. So as a kid, I remember it being a fun house to grow up in because there were so many rooms and it was so big, lots of little nooks and crannies that you could hide in and play in. But the upstairs was always a place that you always felt a little bit, I don't know, the hair would stand up on the back of your neck. You know, there was something about one room in the upstairs that was always a little scary for us, and it was kind of fun because of that. But it's funny because the really strange experiences didn't come until we were, starting to leave as young adults, going off to college and marrying, and one brother went to the Air Force. But that's when all of a sudden, some of the stuff that we'd always felt when we were younger began to manifest itself a little bit more so. And it's funny because my parents, my mom and dad, were as opposite as people could be regarding the house. My dad was he was one of those guys that nothing bothered him. I mean, I remember this big old house. We'd get bats occasionally. It wouldn't bother him a bit. We'd be frantically trying to get these things out of the house, and he'd just go to bed. He said, they'll find their way out, right? And my mother, on the other hand, was not that way at all, And later on, it was her that really experienced the most unusual things. But there's a number of different things that happened. But it was funny that it happened more when we were a little bit older. And I don't know, Mike, if you shared at all some of the experiences that I had.
No.
No, okay. So we grew up as teenagers. We always concentrated on one room as being the source of, whatever strangeness this house presented.
It was Jim's bedroom, was it not?
No, it was a spare bedroom, and it was strange in that when you went in there, it was always very cold. Now, it's an old house. Maybe there was an issue with the heat. I don't know. But we used to play this tabletop hockey game, and we used to have it on an old kitchen table, and we had one light in the entire room, and it just kind of hung right straight over this thing. But you always felt like when you were playing this game that if you would quick turn and look, that you'd see something standing there watching you. So it was always kind of centered around this room. And I remember when we brought, we got a black lab puppy, and we brought that dog home. And so this tiny thing can hardly walk upstairs. He walked through, first time in the house, he walks all the way through the house to the opposite end of the house, goes up the stairs, hangs a left, he could turn left or right, hangs a left, goes down to this hallway and stops at the door right in front of this room, which was, major creepy at that time. But what really started this thing was we always knew, or we always wondered what the history of the house was. And my cousin actually did go do some research on the house. And
decades later.
Yeah, decades later. But it was always one of those things you felt like when you were upstairs that somehow you were in a whole different realm. It was really hard to explain, other than as a 10-year-old when my father passed away, and Mike was helping us clean, he made the same remark. And
this was in the summer of 1998.
Yeah, that just astonished me. But anyways, if you go back, when my parents, who lived in this big old house, and quite frankly, it wasn't insulated well, so in the wintertime, they would close off the upstairs. My dad would put these pieces of plywood over the stairwell, basically, so they didn't have to heat the upstairs. Mm-hmm. So when one of the boys would come home or bring their family home or whatnot, he would open the upstairs up. And, I'm trying to remember about what year this was. I'm thinking it was like 1979, 1980. I came home, and at that time I must have still been in college, I'm thinking. I went to the University of Wisconsin in Madison. So I came home on a weekend, and I went up to my old bedroom and was just exhausted from, it was the middle of the winter, and that's when one of the most dramatic experience I had was I woke up in the middle of the night because I sensed that there was something in the room. And as I sat up in the bed, there right at the foot of the bed was this, it's kind of the classic of what you would expect. It was this translucent woman was standing in right in front of the bed. And she was wearing an old winter coat, and she had like a huge shopping bag or something, and she was just standing there staring at me. There was nothing really, it wasn't like her appearance was anything frightening.
It was just period clothing.
It was
vintage, even.
Well, it was quite frankly, you think, well, how would I react in a situation? Well, tell you how I reacted. I couldn't handle it. I mean, I just kind of. It's just like my mind shut off, and I just flopped back on the bed, right? Yeah. So I was so terrified, I couldn't even talk. So I get up in the morning, and I go down for breakfast, and I told my mother, I said, Mom, you would not believe the dream I had, hoping this was a dream. And I described exactly what had occurred. And she kind of looked at me and gave me one of those looks like, are you sure it was a dream? And I said, I was kind of hoping it was. And she just kind of smiled. And that was, the end of that part of the conversation. So as the years went by, then all of a sudden there were more and more instances of things happening. I recall I was a couple of years later, I'm now working in Chicago. And she called me up one night. Never forget this. I would call her every so often, once every couple of weeks. And I was talking to her, and normally we would talk for, 10 minutes or whatever, just kind of check in. And I noticed that she kept trying to extend the conversation. And it occurred to me that she was very uncomfortable about something. And I said, "Mom, is something wrong?" And she said, "Yes." She said, "Someone is walking around upstairs." Well, again, it was the winter time, so they had the upstairs closed off. And I said, I'm trying to comfort her, 200 miles away on the phone. I said, "Well, it's probably maybe a squirrel got out of the attic," at which she stopped me very abruptly and said, "No, it is someone walking around." And I don't know why I said it, but I'm like, "Well, geez, Mom, just go up there and see what you see," and she's like, "I'm not going up there." I said, "Well, where's Dad?" Dad, he would have just went up there in a shot because nothing ever bothered him. And he said, "Oh, he's at one of his darn, meetings. I think he was in the Lions Club or Elks Club or something." So she was talking while I was trying to assure her that nothing was going to happen. But she said it was someone walking around upstairs. Now, there's no way in the world anyone could get up there, without going through one of the doors. So, that occurred. And then I remember a few weeks later, my wife and I, nope, that's later. We were back up in Marinette, and we were in the old house, and my brother and his wife were there with their two little kids. And so we're sitting in the living room, and my dad walks in with this big smile on his face, and he says, "Have you heard about our latest haunting?" And of course, my mother shoots him a look and then looks at the little grandkids and hushed him up right away. So I never found out what that particular one was. That would have been interesting. And I've told Mike that literally my mom took a lot of experiences in that house to the grave, that everything that happened.
And there was a number of episodes during your upbringing there, such as the Mr. Hyde incident.
Oh, well, yeah, that was a very strange, I'm not sure.
That was not directly related to the house, but it wasn't. No. It was an experience.
It definitely was. This was early January, and I was probably 7 or 8 years old. I'll never forget this. And there had been a storm, so this is Marinette. This is probably, it's below zero. The wind is howling, and I happened to look out, and there was this man was walking past the house, and the thing I remember about him was it looked like he wasn't properly clothed at all. I mean, he had just rags on, and he was kind of
Dickensian.
Yeah, well, whatever that means, sure, I'll go for it. But he and he almost looked like he was. Gosh, I don't know.
You described him to me as having an distended face, like an animal snout.
It was almost like he
a natural amount of body hair.
I mean, on the one hand, I was so compassionate even as a kid because he looked so cold and he looked inadequately dressed. On the other hand, I was terrified because his appearance was just so bizarre.
Inhuman.
Yeah, but anyways.
But he walked with a drag.
Yeah, he kind of dragged his back foot. It was like something you'd see.
Yeah, that ended, the way you described it to me, that ended rather uneventfully. He just
it did.
Kind of disappeared into the night.
But back to the house, we there were a number of other instances of things occurring after my mother had passed away and my father lived there. My aunt would go over and help him, clean the house. And
this would have been in the early 90s.
Yeah, she was up in one of the bedrooms, and she was vacuuming, and she had her granddaughter with her. and all of a sudden she's up in this old house, which she was never comfortable in. And all of a sudden she felt a hand on her arm just to get her attention. And assuming that it was her granddaughter, she turned and saw nobody there. And she promptly walked out of the room, ran down the stairs, grabbed her granddaughter, and never went back in the house. Well, the funny thing was, and my cousin had a similar experience. Now, he used to play Legion baseball with one of my older brothers. And years later, he told me that he had experienced we called her the bag lady, that he had experienced seeing her too, which would have been like almost 10 years previous to my experience. And he said one night they came home from playing baseball. They must have played in Green Bay, which is about an hour away from here, and they got home late. So he just stayed there with my brother, and they up in my brother's bedroom. My brother fell fast asleep, and my cousin was just kind of laying there, and all of a sudden, this old woman appears. And same thing, and she's at the foot of the bed, and he said what really kind of creeped him out was she kind of leaned over the bed, and that's when it was just too much. He kind of shouted something, and then all of a sudden she disappeared. So years later, when he told me this story, it's like, well, geez, Terry, why didn't you tell me this? Here I thought I was the only one that saw the bag lady. But there were other instances.
What was the one in the early 70s, your cousin losing consciousness in the back room?
That was really bizarre. Yeah, he was in the room, the one that we always...
Let's just call it room X.
Yeah, that always creeped us out. He was there, and I don't know what he was doing, but all of a sudden, it's a couple hours later, and we can't find him. We have no idea where he was. But to give you an idea how we felt about this room, we had this little latch, and we would lock the door from the outside when we weren't in there. I don't know why. We just felt safer by doing that. But anyways, a few hours later, all of a sudden, he's knocking at the door, and we realized we locked him in this room. And he got out, and he says, I don't know what happened. He said, all of a sudden, I was very tired, and all of a sudden, I was laying on the floor, and I fell sound asleep. So that was kind of bizarre.
Yeah.
The room itself would kind of give you the creeps, because if you walked in there, first of all, it was very cold. It was extremely dark, and for whatever reason, all of a sudden there is like a toilet in one corner. Now, why, I don't know, but just right there in the room. And we always thought, well, did somebody live up here, back in that time? Was some, poor soul maybe, had some issue or something, and how
did Bart Simpson's evil twin Hugo, was he confined up there?
You know what it was. It was like when people may have been, let's say someone was born with a deformity, or they had a mental issue or something. They didn't handle that back 120 years ago.
They didn't handle it delicately.
No, but we don't know that at all. We don't know that at all.
Now, you had one other story that occurred in the early 70s when you were in your early teens, and this one always fascinated me, which you had a dream or a series of dreams in which you were interacting with a woman of some sort that you'd never seen in waking life in the real world.
Yeah.
And then one morning you were walking outside the house.
No, I was actually walking to a baseball practice. I did. I had this dream, a couple of dreams, and I would always see this woman, and she was, and this was just kind of bizarre. I was 17 years old. I just thought there was this young woman. She's a very attractive woman, and I would always see her in this dream. So one day in the middle of the summer, and I can't remember why, but I'm running to my baseball practice, and all of a sudden I look up and I see this woman riding her bicycle towards me, this really, really old vintage bicycle. And I'm looking at her and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, that's the woman I'm dreaming about. And if that wasn't creepy enough, she puts this big smile on her face and looks at me like I know her somehow. And I remember going to baseball practice, just being creeped out. But, the house itself, my cousin did some research on it.
This was just several years ago.
Yeah, and because he was fascinated, because when I told him I saw the bag lady, and he said he saw her too, he's like, I gotta do some research on the house, and he did. And one of the things he did find out was that the house was built in 1890. It was built by a lumber company, but one of the first owners of the house was a woman, and a single woman, and the local historian told him that would have been very rare at that time for her to have the wherewithal to buy this house, because at that time it probably was a showpiece. It was very impressive. I mean, by the time we got done with it, not so impressive. But so between he and I, we think, okay, if this is what we experienced, is this a woman who basically this is her home and she never wants to leave? Because the experience that I had, as much as my mind could handle, I felt like she was as startled to see me as I was to see her.
Right.
It was almost like when Mom and Dad started closing off the upstairs, she had free reign again or something, but that's kind of the vibe I got. She was as startled as I was. Years later, and Mike will remember this, my dad and Mike and I were at a restaurant. We have a cabin actually about 50 miles from Marinette, and we were having dinner one night. And my dad drops this story on me, and remember, this is the guy who was kind of oblivious but thought it was kind of cool, that the house may have had an extra, inhabitant.
Mm-hmm.
This is years later, and he's older now, and he's not going into dementia by any means, but he's
slipping.
He is slipping. So he was at I can't remember whether it was
wasn't like a Masonic event.
It was the Shriners or something. Okay. He was in Green Bay at some fundraiser or dinner or something. He's telling us this story. And he said he was sitting with a guy from Green Bay, and they struck up a conversation. And the guy asked him where he lived. And he said, I live in Marinette, Wisconsin. And the guy said, oh, really? He said, I lived there for a while. And he said, where do you live? Now, if you saw this house, it stands out. It's unique. So people, always see this big gray house. They know what it is, right? I mean, it's just a big old house, and
it's a local monument / eyesore.
It doesn't look like anything else in the immediate block and neighborhood. So my dad proceeds to tell him, I live on this house on Shore Drive in Marinette, and the guy pops up with, wait a minute. He says, the corner of Hosmer and Shore Drive. And my dad said, yeah. He said, and then he says, you live in the haunted house? Okay. So my dad is just absolutely, dumbfounded. It's like, here's a guy living in Green Bay, hasn't lived in Marinette in decades, and he still remembers this house. So there's probably a bunch of things that we don't remember or we were never aware of. I mean, the house itself has quite a history. There are some things we do know. During Prohibition, apparently, they had a still in the basement. So they were making booze, and they had an explosion and a fire. So if you go in the basement, you can see a lot of the joists and the wood floor is burned. It's charred. And when we sold the house, the guy that bought it, he went and he basically gutted the house. And he's it's kind of a sad story. He spent a lot of money fixing this up, and then he kind of lost the house because he lost his job. But anyways, when he was halfway through the construction, we stopped by one day, and we were thinking, do we ask him, hey, everything seemed normal here? but he said, you guys know that there was a fire here? And we said, yeah, we were aware, but we could see in the basement. And then he took us to the back of the house, and those flames of that fire had basically really the back part of the house should have been torn down, because the flames went all the way up to the top of the roof, and it's a very big house. So we know that happened. Also in the basement, it was kind of weird. There were some, they plastered some of the stone walls, and the foundation is stone, and they plastered it, painted it white, and drew these strange murals, which we have no idea what that was.
Well, I'll describe them. They were like Mediterranean-looking people, kind of olive-complected people, in what appeared to be Italian clothing, and what appeared to be a street scene with fruit carts.
It's just bizarre. We don't
fruit carts and people carrying bags, etc. It looked like a mural of a scene in somewhere in Sicily or something you would see on the wall of an Italian restaurant.
Yeah, it's just bizarre. So, the house had a history that we were never really aware of. I mean, the one thing I did find interesting was that as we were looking at the history of the house, that a couple bought the house about just a year and a half before they sold it to my mom and dad. But they did go through a divorce. So, I'm assuming that was the reason. Or was it that after 18 months of living in there with little surprises around every corner, maybe they wanted to dump the house? I don't know. But it's a neat home. And to be honest with you, every time I go out there now, I'm just dying to just go knock on the door and say, "Hey, how's it going?"
Well, who was the suicide?
Well,
that occurred in there.
Well, this would have been the woman that bought the house in like the early 1900s, and that's the one that we'll call the bag lady, because we think it was her house. Her daughter, that woman actually died in 1921, but her daughter took the home after her mother passed, and she lived there with her husband, and it was her husband that my uncle thinks actually committed suicide in the home. He actually hung himself. I can't verify that. I'm not quite sure. But yes, it was an interesting house to grow up in.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
I mean, it was always centered around the room,
It was in 1998, after my grandfather died, that it kind of began in full force, not as individual incidents, but as like a sustained presence, if that makes sense, because we spent the bulk of that summer
cleaning it all.
Not just him, but his brothers and sisters-in-law, etc., driving back and forth from their respective homes, cleaning this home out for resale. And I recall at the time, it was very much a self-contained Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
Once you stepped inside and closed the door behind you, you felt as if you were leaving the normal world and entering another one.
Yeah, it had a very strange vibe to it.
Yeah, if during that summer, if you were standing inside looking out the window at just the sidewalk, the street, the houses across the street, you felt like you were looking out into another world, like one that you'd left, like one that you were no longer a part of.
It definitely, the house would envelop you. You would be there, and it was like you were taken to a different time and place.
Time was non-existent.
Yeah, it was strange that way.
You could step inside. You could spend a period of time in there, thinking, damn it, my sniffles are back, allergies. And thinking you'd been in there for hours, like you'd been in there all day, and then you'd step outside, check your watch, you'd been in there for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So time dilation, mostly it was the atmosphere. It was this thick, warm atmosphere, so thick you feel like you could reach forth and just touch it physically. It was solid.
I remember, though, the the incident where I saw, what do we call her, the bag lady, I remember how that shook me, because I remember a couple of years later, I was actually in a car accident and did some damage to my leg, and I remember being at the old home. By then I was living in Chicago, but Mom and Dad had opened up the upstairs because everyone was home for the holidays, I think it was. But I remember thinking I was so tired and I wanted to lay down, but even at 22 years old, I did not want to go up to that room and lay down. I mean, I remember I dragged a television set in there so I could turn it on to distract me because I was so tired.
For me, in that summer of '98, it was that feeling of, in addition to the atmosphere, in addition to the time dilation, it was that feeling of being watched and followed.
Yeah, that
at all times. It felt like something was in my head, reading my thoughts. When I spoke, it felt like something was listening in. But the thing was, it didn't feel like it was something in the house, per se. It felt like it was the house itself. It's like the old expression, these walls have eyes.
It was one of those places that you felt like you never wanted to turn real quickly, because you were always worried that you'd see something. And I remember after my dad had passed away that when I would be up that way on business, because there was a place I used to visit a lot, I would stop and check on the house. And occasionally I would just slowly walk up that stairs, and it was like, man, it all came back. It's like, I don't know if it's like a childhood feeling or just the house, and I'd walk up there, but I wouldn't stay up there very long,
And at the time, during that summer, wasn't there an elderly woman who claimed to have grown up on the house and claimed that yes, it was weird. It was someone else when you were selling it.
It could have been. It could have been.
Vaguely, yeah.
But the house itself was big, and if you were into, renovating old homes, it had a lot of character. I mean, it really did. The way my mother described it, and I remember as a kid when we moved in, it's beautiful wallpaper and real ornate woodwork, and just over the years, 4 boys just kind of really, really took its toll on the house. And my dad wasn't really into home repair, so to speak. He was more into trout fishing, so the house kind of looked pretty dilapidated by the time that we ended up selling it. But yeah, the other, Mike, did you share the lady on the horse?
Yeah, but we could hear it again from your perspective.
Yeah, definitely.
So this would have been about 19. Let's see, you were born in '88.
Yeah,
you were about 6 years old.
No, older than that. It was summer of either '95 or '96.
Was it then? Okay. So up in Marinette County, there's all kinds of little trout streams, but sometimes you got to go back, on little dirt roads and stuff to get to them. And there's one particular gem that I used to love to fish, and I would always take Mike there when he was little. And I'd drag him down to this little trout stream, and we'd catch these little brook trout. And one summer night, probably about this time of year, it was almost dark, and I thought, well, we got to head back to the cabin. So now, in order to get back out, you basically drive on this little dirt road through thick woods, probably a quarter of a mile. And so we started driving out, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, here's this woman dressed up in like fox hunting garb on this magnificent black horse. And there's no horses up there. There's no
stables, no trails.
There's nothing. And all of a sudden, here's this woman, and she shot me a look like
death glare.
Yeah, like, what are you doing here? And it's like I was speechless. I could not figure out, what is she doing here.
Right.
Right.
She was dressed in the red riding coat, and the white whatever you call them. And this horse, I remember this horse was just magnificent. And it was
resplendent.
It was like I felt like the little kid in class that just got chastised for doing something he shouldn't have done. So it's like I said to Mike, oh boy, we gotta get out of here. So and it was just about dark, And like there are no trails to ride a horse. This is ridiculous. So I'm driving a little bit further down the road. Of course, I look in the rearview mirror and there's nothing to see.
Gone without a sound or a trace.
So I'm about, so we drive about a half a mile, and then I'm back out on a normal road, and I'm going down the road thinking, what in the heck was that? It was just the most bizarre meeting. I to this day, that is just baffles me as to what that was, because there's no way in the world there was any kind of anything there.
One summer night in the late 90s, not long after this, you had a similar experience that you told me about when you were at McClintock Park. You were fishing in the water. It was getting late. Sun was setting, and suddenly you felt this.
Yeah, very.
You didn't see an angry glare, but you felt one.
Yeah, well, that particular park, that, and there's been people have gone and actually done investigations at that park, and I'm one of the people that goes there the most often, and just this was one night towards dusk. I just got this very uneasy feeling, and I looked around, and the park itself is absolutely beautiful, but it is not visited very often. There's another similar park down the road that seems to be the preference, but there was an incident that occurred 1976 where a young couple was murdered there. So it's always had this thing hanging over it, and it's got, and if you go there and, I don't know, maybe it's just if the circumstances are, the place will give you a real creepy look, and it's attracted people that have felt the same thing, obviously, because they've done investigations.
I read online once that orbs have been seen
Yeah.
there. And I also know that it is underlined with granite, which is a conductor of piezoelectricity, and that figures as a culprit in many paranormal cases. But Dad, this night, basically you were fishing, and suddenly you felt as if you were being watched by an angry presence.
Well, not so much angry, just a presence that shouldn't be there.
You felt like something was there that didn't want you there. That saw you as an intruder, just like that woman on the horse did.
Yeah.
But so kind of like a Patrick Harper Panic in the Woods type scenario.
Yeah, and I, even now when you go there, I don't know. Maybe it's because we know what happened in that park. But it does have a creepy feel to it. I remember I went there a few years ago, and the only thing that kept me there till dark was the fact that this hatch came off and I was catching big trout. But then it's like when you leave, it's like you just run up the hill, get in your car, and get out of there.
Yeah, it's also worth noting this is the same park that my friend and I had that strange.
Yeah, you guys did too.
We had that strange hiking experience a number of years ago in broad daylight in the kind of the back stretch, the back path, where we experienced again time dilation, strange atmosphere, strange feeling of being watched and followed. 2 hours turned out to be 20 minutes, which we discussed on my last appearance.
Right.
Well, you guys talk about the granite. Now, all like our entire land, our 20 acres, is entirely underlain with red granite. So there's only about 3 feet of topsoil there. So it's those are a couple of experiences that come to mind. But the house, we used to joke about it being haunted all the time. And we have told, I tell friends, I grew up in a haunted house, and they look at you like, yeah, really? Well, I'll go up there, and I was like, yeah, you come on anytime you want. And of course, I don't own the house.
But I always got the impression it wasn't just a haunting. It wasn't just a ghost in the house, however you define ghost. It was like there was more to it than that. The land it was on, the structure itself was just abnormal to begin with. Even if nothing was indwelling in its walls, it'd still be weird. Yeah.
Well, it just struck me, and I don't know. I don't spend time investigating this kind of thing, but it just struck me that the story was that this woman bought this house, on her own, which is pretty impressive, and it's almost like this was her house. And
wasn't her daughter? She passed on to her daughter. Also lived there after her.
Yeah, she did. But that woman lived there for maybe she just never wanted to leave. I don't know.
And what?
Because nothing. You know what? The story about when she touched my aunt's arm. That was not like an aggressive thing. It was almost like my aunt felt like she was appreciating the fact that she was taking care of the home and she was cleaning in that bedroom, and she just wanted to kind of acknowledge her. And unfortunately, she scared the dickens out of her, and that was the last time she went there.
But what was I see? Because I recall, for me, that summer of 1998, It was kind of like the house I grew up in that the first floor was clean, relatively speaking. The weirdness was concentrated largely on the second floor, and just like in the house I grew up in one specific room. This was 20, 30 plus years after he grew up in it, but for me, I always detected it the strongest in what would have been my uncle's childhood bedroom in the center of the hall.
Yeah.
But that's just me.
Well, it was interesting, even... I think, in thinking back, I think my mother was aware that there was something about the house that was a little off, because I remember there was another bedroom directly across from the room that we did not use, and I expressed interest in having my own bedroom. And she was very reluctant to have me go into that room, and I remember I painted it, and we put carpeting down. And I went in there, but then, a couple of years later, my brother went into the Air Force, and she insisted, which I thought was really strange at the time. She insisted that I not stay in that room and go back to the room I was in. Maybe nothing, but it was unusual, I think.
Yeah.
And my mother was as level-headed a person as she was not prone to. These things were things that she did not want to be happening. I mean, her health wasn't very good. She didn't need to be scared to death, by what's going to be around the corner. She eventually ended up staying down on the couch, even in the summertime, because I don't think she wanted to be upstairs in the house. That was a creepy place for her. And
What was the synchronistic experience you had in Chicago in the early 80s when you kept waking up at the same time?
Oh, yeah. That was kind of weird. I actually took a job in Chicago, so this was about like 1981, and I couldn't find a place to rent, and I ended up renting like a basement apartment in this old brick building, which was well kept.
And what neighborhood was it?
Well, this was in Rogers Park, which is part of Chicago.
Okay.
It's towards the lake. Very old, but well kept. And for some reason, the first several nights, I woke up at exactly the same time, 3:12. And I remember that creeping me out. I was nervous enough starting a new job as an engineer in downtown Chicago, and all of a sudden, I'm dealing with this, right? I'm waking up in the middle of the night, always at 3:12, and I thought, geez, somebody getting home from work at that time, but
Does that number, Seriah, to your knowledge, does that number have any synchro significance?
Oh, that I don't know.
Okay, because I could read more Coleman or more Jim Brandon for that information, I guess. But we're still looking into that one.
Yeah, so it's one of those things. You grow up, and it certainly makes for good stories around a campfire. I'll tell you that. But I remember even in my early 20s, man, that house scared me. It really did.
Huh.
And it wasn't like what I saw was evil looking or threatening or anything. It was just that experience of waking up and just seeing that translucent, and it wasn't like it was anything hideous that my mind had conjured up. It was an old woman in a winter coat with just like a big shopping bag,
Which sounds like something out of time, like a time slip type of thing.
Yeah. and it just, I remember sitting up and being so terrified I could not speak. I could not scream. I couldn't do anything. And it was like the mind just shut off. Boom.
Yeah.
There it was, there I was, the brave one, right? Confronting the ghost.
Yeah.
But the next morning when I got up, I was like, oh boy, what was that? And I felt obligated to tell my mother. So I thought I'd just slip it in as, I had this crazy dream. Well, she wasn't having any part of it because she obviously had experienced some things.
But it's worth noting that at the time, the whole time you're growing up in there, that kind of thick miasma was not present yet. That didn't really start until after Grandpa died.
Well,
to my knowledge.
Yeah, I don't know.
Because I remember you taking me there in like the early to mid 90s when he was still alive and being in the house, and I didn't feel anything at that time.
Yeah. I'm not sure, Mike. I'm not sure. But I remember going there sometimes and just feeling like something wasn't right at all. And, my dad struggled with alcohol.
Mm.
And living alone after my mom was gone was very difficult for him. And it was obviously a very dark time in his life, and he's stuck in this old house by himself, and
his younger half brother invited himself to move in.
Yeah, and that wasn't a good situation either.
I remember at the time you went there and you came back and told me you felt just a dark vibe in the house with them there. A feeling of oppression was the term you used.
Yeah, I did. It was like, two people kind of being in bondage to something. It wasn't good. I don't know.
Huh.
It was a happy place to grow up for the most part, and we always felt like there was something there, and but it wasn't until it was front and center that it was like, wow, there really was something there.
Right.
Did you ever feel as if like your family was drawn to the place, as if your moving there, your moving in was orchestrated externally?
Well, you know what?
Even if you didn't realize it at the time?
One thing I've always wanted to look into a little further is that my mom and dad never had a lot of money. And they were able to afford this house with 4 boys, the oldest being 5, and, Jim, and then the 4 of us. My dad never made a lot of money. I always thought, how could he afford that house? Unless it was actually, sold at a very reduced price.
Oh, yeah.
My mother said the house was absolutely magnificent when they moved in. She called it a showpiece. She said it was a showpiece, and then we moved in. So I don't know, but it was, as a kid growing up in a house, it certainly was eventful, and so when things of like that come up, things that go bump in the night in conversation, I just say, hey, I got a story for you. I'll tell you about the house I grew up in. But the experience, seeing that, like the woman on the horse, that is just bizarre.
Yeah.
And that is in a very, very sparsely populated, like there are no, the nearest town probably has 50 people, not even, maybe Athelstan. I mean, it's in the middle of nowhere.
What is Athelstan but 3 buildings and a...
yeah, and now with COVID, it's...
Deaf child at play sign?
Yeah, now with COVID, it's down to nothing, and there's 1 restaurant. I mean, so it's basically in the middle of nowhere.
See, I always suspected that figure we saw, that wasn't really human, that was something else.
I have no idea.
Taking on a human form, something similar to the Men in Black, or...
Mike, I have no idea, but the thing that struck me about the whole thing was the looks that she shot us. That somehow we were...
Trespassing.
Somewhere where we shouldn't have been, and then looking back and seeing absolutely nothing. But the thing that struck me as much as her, was this horse. I mean, this horse was absolutely amazing.
Yeah, you'd think after spending even a little amount of time in those woods, it'd be pretty dirty.
This horse was jet black, was just the most beautiful thing, and I don't know. No idea.
Huh.
No idea. Or the one I wanted to drive back there again and kind of look around, but I wasn't sure who owns the land now, so I didn't do it.
Oh, yeah.
But that's kind of the story of the home I grew up in, and Mike actually wrote something on, I forget, what is that website?
Yeah, yourghoststories.com.
Yeah.
I remember that, I think close to a decade ago, I wrote a brief summary of those experiences and posted them on the site just to see what kind of reaction.
Yeah, it got amazing reaction.
Yeah, it was interesting to me because one of the posters, I believe, was actually in Ireland, knew the house and knew the area.
Well, the thing that struck me is there were so many people that wanted to know which house it was, and I'm glad you did not disclose that for the owner.
I didn't even know the address at the time.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, that's the story of the home. There's probably other stories that related to the home that I can't even remember.
Yeah, well, I'm sure.
It was kind of one of those things we just always lived with, and it was kind of our own neat little secret.
when Terry did his research, that was in like 2013, wasn't it?
2014.
Yeah, and where did he consult? Where did he go?
Well, he went down to the city records, down to City Hall, and apparently the guy that was there was very kind. And now Terry says that he was able to identify one relative that's still alive, directly descended from. It would have been the man that supposedly committed suicide.
Yeah.
And he lives in Saki, and Terry tried to call him, tried to call the family, but he said they wouldn't talk to him.
That's understandable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, totally. I mean, it's a sad thing if it happened. And, Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing this whole thing with us. This was really interesting.
Yeah. Marinette is really a neat town because it's right on the mouth of the Menominee River, which dumps into Green Bay. So there is quite a history there. Mostly revolves around logging and the Menominee Indians that lived in that area. The town is named after Queen Marinette.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it has much of a Fortean history though, besides what we of course know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
But yeah, that's the story of our the home I grew up in, and it's funny that when I walk in that house, you could just I sensed there was something different there.
Does anyone actually own it now? Is anyone living there now?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Yep. But I've never walked into a house since then, and I've owned a couple houses and rented a couple that I felt anything.
Yeah.
In that house, I did. And I almost feel like what we experienced was just maybe it was the woman that bought the house, and this was her pride and joy, and she never wanted to leave.
Yeah, very possible.
Don't know.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Sure. Well, thanks for listening.
I want to take a moment here and thank all my patrons. Without you, this show may not be a thing. And I'm going to give a shout out to those pledging $10 or more. Super Inframan, Allison Cook, Lindsay Trebet, Tim, Big Boy Limina, Craig Parmenter, Walker, Joanna Rojas, Maddie, David Moore, Vincent Treewell, The Great Change, Stone Wilderness, Luke Osborne, Becky Trainer, Chris Barr, Rob Drummond, Alex Whitcomb, Edu Camahort, Tactical Therapist, Janet Bunderson, 36 Dingo, Sam Sharon, Jennifer Campbell, American Rambler, Kevin, John Rutledge Foster, Eric Citron, Andy McNamara, Sasha Jorg, Matthias Sunby, Dominic O'Malley, Christopher Vaughn, Riker and Stark, J. Otto Bullitt, Jose A., Roger Gonzalez, Craig Cisternos, Ray Benedetto, Lindsey Jackson K., Alfred Tuttle, Matthew Sproul, Kevin Schreck, Patricia Gaia-Quinta, William Lovelace, Mark Brady, Chris 646, Carla Mahoney, and James Lattimore. Thank you all so very, very much. So I am here with Joe, and you are a listener to the show who's had some unusual experiences throughout your life. Am I correct on that?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So you want to talk a little bit about like some of your first experiences?
Yeah, so, it's kind of like many times I've heard, since I was a little girl, I've known that it wasn't, what I thought quite right. Now looking back, there's nothing wrong with me. Mm-hmm. So I guess, one of the experiences when I was a little girl, I was able to have an out-of-body experience. So I remember being like 8 or 9 and being in bed and everything was quiet and concentrate hard enough to where I could feel, I knew my body was still in the bed, but I could feel like maybe, I don't know, you want to call it my soul or my spiritual body. I was able to like leave my body and then do like a flip.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So, and then I kind of, as I got older, that, I stopped doing it. But I do remember that ever since I was a little girl, I was able to do things when I concentrated on it. Another thing too, I had, what they call it, the, poltergeist during puberty.
Okay.
I was living at my grandpa's house at the time, and in the living room, he had pictures of all the grandkids, and we have a very, very huge family. So there was a whole wall was covered in pictures. And then one day, we were looking and we noticed that only the pictures that I was in, the glass was cracked through.
Huh.
And, we're like, first, of course, they asked me, why did you do that? Did you do that? And I'm like, no, why would I do that? And it was from one corner to the other. And it was about 3 or 4 pictures. And then just weird stuff started happening around the house. We would find piles of dirt all over the place. A couple times when you were sleeping, boom, you would be waking up in the middle of the night with dirt thrown in your face.
Wow.
And there is no reason why. I mean, there was no holes in the ceiling. There was nothing. Also, a few times we heard the doorknobs turning. You can hear the doorknobs turning at night. I have no idea why that would happen. I actually at one point did see a shadow figure leaning over my bed. And then that's when I was like, that's it. I'm done, right? And one day while I was at school, my grandfather actually had a priest come to the house and bless the house and put holy water in all the rooms while I was not there. Because things were just kind of getting so bad. And then after that, it kind of seemed to help.
And you didn't know? Or did you know afterwards?
What?
The holy water. Yeah.
I didn't know. They didn't tell me until we moved out.
Okay, so it stopped without you knowing.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. So,
yeah.
So it wasn't like something unconscious to you that suddenly said, oh, there was holy water, I'm going to not do this anymore, because you had no way. I mean, unless you psychically picked up on it.
No, I mean, I had no clue that a priest had gone through the house until I moved out with my mom. We moved back home, and then they told me that that they did that. And so I was like, never really clicked, until I'm older now and thinking back on all those things,
Yeah.
It just all makes sense.
The dirt thing is weird. I don't think I've heard of people having dirt thrown on their face before.
Yeah, it was random. Well, they even hired somebody to go up into the ceiling or to go into the attic to see if there were termites or if maybe there was, like a raccoon or, something up there that was causing it to happen. No, there was nothing. My grandpa was very kind of aware of, I guess they call it the other or spiritualism and everything. So, he knew that something was going on. And and he knew that it was attracted to me, whatever it was. But, looking back, it could have very well been my energy since, I have other encounters with my energy doing weird things. So,
right.
I don't know.
Right. And you had contacted me after the show on Kundalini because you said you had a lot of these similar effects.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess I'll tell you, I didn't send you my favorite story, but I'll tell you kind of like my favorite story, like my favorite encounter. A few months ago, we went camping. We took a bunch of school kids camping, and there was a bunch of parents. And, unfortunately, we had the one parent who was an organizer, and he just totally kind of left everything on us. So camp was over. A bunch of the adults took the kids hiking, and he was, quote unquote, in charge of all the tents and all the supplies, but he took off too to go hiking. And I was livid. I was so, so, so angry. And I was just, cursing up a storm, so mad. And his truck was parked right next to his tent. And there was other parents there, and they were all laughing at me because I was just throwing such a fit. And all of a sudden, you hear what sounds like, thunder clapping. Next thing you know, this giant branch comes out of nowhere and crashes right on his truck. Of all the places it could have crashed, right on his truck. And at that moment, all the parents that were there turned around and all looked at me. And they were like, "Whoa, did you do that?" And I'm like, not intentionally, but maybe. But yeah, I had contacted you because you had talked about like the energy that you feel throughout your body. And I've had several experiences when I have this funny sensation that goes throughout my body. And I really didn't know, how to describe it or what it was. But when you were talking about it, it's totally made sense. I've gone through the whole, am I having an anxiety attack? Am I having a panic attack? Mm-hmm. But it goes away, and I feel fine. I've also had where, you hear like gushing noises like in your ears.
Yep, like the rushing water sort of thing.
Gushing waters, yeah. And I've gone to all sorts of specialists. I've had MRIs. I've had ultrasounds done on my neck, on my arteries. I've had every test you can think of. They cannot find anything. Mm-hmm. There is no explanation to what I have. And they're like, sorry, we don't know what to tell you. So I've just learned to live with it. Did
you have any trauma as a kid that might have set it off?
No. Mm-mm.
Okay.
No.
See, neither did I. That it is a common thing for trauma to set this type of stuff off, but that's not the case for everyone.
Yeah. Nope, nothing. I mean, you're normal, fall off a bike or,
yeah.
that kind of stuff. But no, nothing like that. So, we thought that it might be my blood pressure. They put me on blood pressure medications, nothing.
That seems dangerous to throw you on blood pressure medication just because of a rushing sound in your ear.
Well, they try stuff.
Yeah.
To see, but it didn't help.
Well, it definitely sounds like Kundalini.
Yeah.
And you affected computers as well, right? And electronics?
Yeah. So where I work with computers and, or I work on computers. And sure enough, every day that I work, something goes down. The programs go down, the computers go down, the computer will die on me, and they know too. Everybody knows that when I'm at work, something's going to go down. And, IT has come, I was on the phone with this one guy trying to help me with a program, and he told me, he's like, it's the user error. And I'm like, it's not, I'm doing, the program won't load,
Yeah.
No one else seems to have these problems, just me.
Yep. They affect other electronics as well?
Just, lights will go out.
Okay. Like the slider thing?
Yeah. Lights will go out, and then it'll happen in rooms. And then when I leave the room, they'll come back.
Oh.
Yeah. Another thing too, it's about like static electricity.
Mm-hmm.
I shock people all the time. And then also sometimes at night, I can see the tips of my fingers light up.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah. I don't know if anyone else.
From static electricity?
Yeah. From the static electricity. Yeah. I'll be like in bed and, I'll get up and then I can see like the tips of my fingers light up. They're like a very light blue, almost white color.
Wow. Yeah, I've never had that happen.
Yeah. And then and I had told you candles too. Or flames, I guess. If I concentrate hard enough, I can make, sparks start coming off of candles. And, that freaked me out one time, so I stopped doing that.
Okay. Did you say you were very young when you did that?
Yeah. I was, I had a roommate and she was super witchy. And so she was introducing me to all these different things and different type of witchcraft. And so I was starting to learn and practice, candle magic. And I was really concentrating, and I was making it spark up, and it just kind of freaked me out. So I stopped doing that.
Now, what was one of you mentioned a couple other things to me, that you can actually absorb pain sometimes.
Oh yeah. So, ever since, I was young, if someone complained of pain, like a back pain or something, and actually, now that I remember, I have an uncle who, I was really little. I was probably 9 or 10. And I remember that he had chest congestion. He had a cold. And so I remember rubbing his chest with menthol-y stuff, because I was trying to take care of him the way my mom took care of me when I had a cold. Mm-hmm. And then I remember my hand hurting afterwards, but that's what happens. So if someone tells me, oh, I have a backache or my, leg hurts, if I rub on it, usually, I'll use some type of coconut oil or something. Mm-hmm. It relieves their pain, but then my hand will turn bright red and it'll become very stiff and it'll hurt.
Wow.
But usually running it under water for a few minutes helps that. And
it does help the person you're doing it to as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like significantly? Like does it go, if they're in pain, does it go completely away or does it just bring it down a little bit?
Well, usually it's just kind of like like an ache, like, oh, my back hurts, my leg hurts. I haven't really tried it on anybody that has anything that's like chronic.
Mm-hmm.
But, they've told me that it's gone.
I wonder what's happening there. I wonder if you're giving them energy, and it's just moving through your hands, or if you're pulling away some of their energy that's causing them problems. Or just
I think that's what it is, but I've been able to kind of concentrate and focus on maybe that tension and that energy staying in my hand and not traveling anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Because, you have to be careful when you're exchanging energy like that because, you don't want to cause, pain to yourself or hurt yourself too.
Oh, absolutely. Anything else you can think of that is unusual? Have you ever seen like UFOs or anything like that?
Yeah, I have. I was a teenager and I just remember, I was with a bunch of friends. We're just really kind of just in front of my house. And then we look up and we saw, your typical, unsolved mysteries, V-shaped triangle and it was just all red lights. And I felt like it was really low. It came down pretty low. And I remember running inside the house and telling my dad, I'm like, Dad, I just saw something. I just saw UFO. It was at night. And he said, and this will always, stick in my brain, but he always told me, he's like, you didn't see a UFO. He's like, you saw a Thunderbird. And so I was like, okay, and I left it at that.
Well, either way, it could be a UFO.
Yeah. It was, I'm pretty sure it was a UFO.
Well, it's an unidentified flying and it's an object, whether it's a Thunderbird or a craft or what.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, just throughout my whole life, I have received messages from people that have passed away. In my dreams, usually within a couple weeks to a month after they've passed away, I'll usually have a dream where we'll be kind of in a random location, sometimes we'll be at the market or we'll be in an office and I'm aware that they've passed away.
Right.
And I'll ask them, how are you doing? How's it going? And they'll tell me, I had this one lady that I knew, and she passed away, and I saw her with her husband. I never met her husband. I just saw pictures of him, but, she told me, she's like, I'm doing well. She's like, I'm very, very happy. And I'm like, good, and I've had that happen a few times with relatives and family friends.
So you're definitely, connected to this stuff somehow. And I wonder how much the Kundalini makes that connection.
Yeah. So that's one thing. And I've received just messages, before my grandmother passed away, just weird things were happening around the house. And then, like, for example, here's an example. I, was doing laundry and I was, washing my whites. And when I took my clothes out, everything was stained in purple. It just was purple everywhere. And I was like, oh man, I ruined my load. And at that moment, my mom came and told me that my grandma had passed away. And so, of course, forget about the laundry, and we're dealing with that. And then when I came back to the laundry, everything was white. All the purple stains, the purple blotches, everything was gone.
Oh, wow. So do you think they were there in the first place, or do you think you may have just like almost hallucinated them on there? Like, did anyone else see the purple?
I don't remember because it was kind of a chaotic
right. Yeah.
time. But I could. Yeah.
I mean, it could be that you somewhere you knew that happened to your grandmother, and it manifested as you seeing purple stains on the white clothing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because I think that is what happens in some of these cases. Like we don't, we pick up this stuff psychically, but we don't know how to process it directly. So it comes out in, poltergeist activity or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I'm trying to think. And I've just had so many, random things happen.
Right.
I have to be careful with my words too when I talk, because sometimes those things will happen.
What do you mean?
So I had told a family member, I said, you really need to be careful when you're driving, because even though you're not at fault, if someone, hits you, you need to make sure that you follow all, just giving him advice. And I'm like, just please be careful. And sure enough, he calls me an hour later and said that he got hit by a car.
And do you think you're causing that or picking it up from the future?
I don't know, but the way my family is taking it is that I'm the one that's like, kind of like, causing it. So I've been told to like kind of tone it down a little bit, because a lot of, sometimes when I warn people of stuff, and I don't know, it just comes out,
Yeah.
And then it'll happen. So I've been really focusing on trying to turn it into a positive. So just trying to, speak positively and be very encouraging, and trying to use that energy, for the good, and not.
Have you had any instances where you warned someone about something and the outcome was positive? Like, you told them to be careful when they were driving and they almost got hit, but they were being careful, type of thing.
Yeah, it happens all the time.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So it is useful.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You're not just getting the information about something that's definitely going to happen and you can't do anything about it.
No, it happens. Yeah. I'm kind of known in my family and my circle of friends that when I speak, it's not in vain, and to take what I say,
yeah,
seriously, or cautious warnings.
And you mentioned the fire magic. Do you practice any forms of magic or Wicca or anything like that?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't follow a single path, just because I think that the path that you choose is your own path. But I mean, I've known since I was a little girl that I was, a witch. I remember for Halloween every year, I wanted to be a witch. Other girls were. This is back when we had the plastic masks. Everybody was Barbie.
Right. I
always was a witch. I always was a witch. And it's funny because I have two daughters. They're both teenagers, but I saw it in them when they were little too.
Have they had experiences?
Yeah, just a couple weeks ago, my 13-year-old was yapping that the hand lotion in the bathroom moved like 2 inches. So I think the puberty poltergeist is going to strike again.
Yeah.
But I practice a lot of things, and always good and always protection. And then always, my motto is, if I have, we all have. So always trying to attract, abundance in many ways, and sharing that abundance with everybody.
Right. A rising tide raises all ships.
Yeah.
It's a very, very true thing.
Yeah.
All right. Well, is there anything else you want to share?
Well, like I said, I've had a lifetime of experiences. I've seen ghosts. We've seen shadow people.
Other than the ones like looking over your bed that one time?
Yeah. And then, and I've had the thing where ever since I was a little girl, I could always hear someone calling my name, you know, and I turn around, nothing, nothing there. I've seen apparitions of, the Blessed Mother. And
were you raised Catholic?
Well, and that's the funny thing is that I wasn't raised religiously. Myself as a teenager wanted more. I wanted to learn about religion. I guess in a way I wanted to belong. And so I actually studied different religions, but ultimately kind of, I took the Catholic path. My husband's Catholic, and it's nothing against anybody who's Catholic at all. My most respect, and I adore the traditions. But it just, when my daughters were little and I was sending them to Sunday school and we were going to school, it just didn't feel right to me. I didn't feel right, but I do incorporate a lot of traditions and beliefs in my path.
Okay. Yeah, well, you use what works for you. And for some people, that's what I do as well. I mean, it works great for me. Some people need, the path to be outlined for them, and then there's people who can't work with that outline, Everyone's a little bit different.
Yeah, and that's what's great. And it's funny because, I'm going to turn, me and my friends we're turning in our 40s, right? And so a lot of us are done raising small children, and I'm noticing kind of like this spiritual awakening in like my social group and like my friends, and they're asking me stuff, Now
you're the lead witch.
I guess. I guess.
So what other?
I walk with them, not ahead of them. I walk with them.
Right. What are some of the other shadow people experiences you had?
It was shortly after. It was around the same time when I was having all the experiences at my grandpa's house. I was at my aunt's house, and they have it was a hallway, and at the end of the hallway, it led to the outside patio, and so the door had a window on it, and I remember seeing, and I was with a couple friends, and they saw them too, or they saw it too. It was the outline of the top part of a man, and it was looking in, and of course we're a bunch of girls, we freaked out. Because we thought, my gosh, who's back there staring at us? You know?
Oh yeah.
And so we grabbed my cousin, and he's older than we are. He went outside, turned on the patio lights, looked around. There was nobody there, and the way the backyard was set up, there wasn't really a way for anybody to go back there or to jump in or jump over.
Right.
So that was.
Nowhere for someone to hide.
Yeah. And, and like I said, he checked back there, and, and they had said that they have had experiences in that house because his dad passed away a long, long time ago, and he passed away in that house. So they believe that he's still there.
Oh.
Yeah.
And as far as ghosts... has that been a regular thing throughout your life?
Yeah, it has. And even even with my children too. You read the creepy things that kids say. I used to work at a Alzheimer's and dementia home, and there was a lady. who, she had no kids, and I bonded with her very well. And, she passed away, and her name was Alice. And, my daughter, she was about 3 years old, and I heard her talking in the room, playing with her dolls. And I walked by and I'm like, huh, who are you talking to? And she looks at me and she goes, oh, I'm talking to Alice. I'm like, huh, okay. Kept on my way. And, there's no reason for her to, know that name. And she wasn't, didn't have a imaginary friend named Alice, nothing. It was like a one-time thing. It was just Alice. Go. Okay.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And any dead pet apparitions or senses of like dead pets being around?
Oh, you're good. I lost a little puppy about 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope my husband's not hearing me, but I mean, this dog was like the love of my life. I love this dog to death. He was just the best little dog, and he died in a little accident. And he was a little tiny little Yorkie, and so he had a little collar that had little cat bells, so you can always hear him.
Mm-hmm.
And after he died, I could hear him around the house. I would hear the little bells because his little collar I had put away in one of my drawers. It was, I put it in a little bag and put it in one of my drawers. So I know that the collar wasn't out. And
right.
I could hear him, I could just hear his little jingles. And then my husband did say that he did see a little shadow kind of squish, run by around the corner. And I'm like, oh, it was him. He was there.
Which I'm sure was very comforting.
Yeah.
Nice. Any other types of experiences we haven't covered?
Trying to think. I should have done the outline. You told me you should have done the outline. I feel like I'm missing one. I'm not.
You've never had like a near-death experience or anything like that?
Well, now that you mention it. When I was little, my family is from Central America, and I went over there. I was about 7 or 8, and I got cholera, and I was very, very, very sick. Very sick. And it was I love my mom, but I'm not sure why she would take us to a country that was in the middle of a civil war to go visit for vacation. But anyways, so I just remember that after 7 o'clock, lights were out. There was no lights. I remember they couldn't get me to a hospital. I was very dehydrated. I was very, very, very dehydrated, very sick. And they couldn't get me to, they couldn't give me an IV. So they were giving me IV fluid orally to drink.
Oh.
Yeah, I was very, very sick. And I just remember laying there and kind of eerie, surrounded by candles because we couldn't have the lights on, and my mom crying and my grandmother with her, and telling her that it's going to be okay. But I just remember that I was very, very, very sick. And then that's the only thing I can remember. I have a lot of that. I don't know if it's just blacked out or because I was so little, I don't remember, but that's all I remember is that scene, kind of very eerie.
Did any of the stuff that happened to you happen before that, or was all of it after that event?
I mean, it started happening after that.
Yeah, that might have been the event that set it off. I mean, that would count as trauma.
Possibly. But even before then, I always felt a little...
Oh yeah, but I'm saying that like that event might have really just triggered off what was already there.
Oh, yeah, possibly, yeah.
You know, so you may not have had the depth of experiences had it not been for that event.
Possibly.
I mean, you see people who have near-death experiences often come back with active Kundalini and energy and stuff like that. So, as well as people who have what they consider to be abduction encounters. So, there's something to that. I don't know what it is, but it's definitely a thing.
Yeah, I never really considered it that could have been it. But, yeah, probably. Because after that, and a lot of it is centralized within my mother's side of the family, because this happened at my aunt's house. The gentleman or the shadow that I saw was at her house. My grandpa lived right across the street, so all that stuff that was happening was literally like right across the street. So, that area too.
Yeah. Yeah, so it was all in the same physical area as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But stuff still happens to you now, or no?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That when I feel the energy like coming through that all, I haven't been back there in. It'll be like almost 20 years. So.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Did you have the same type of experiences there that you do now, or is now more energy related?
Now it's more energy.
Okay.
Yeah, that's for sure. Now it's more energy. But, then again, I could have had a lot of other things happen. I just didn't know what to read into it. I didn't know what it was. But now,
Yeah, I mean, when I look back through my notes of everything that happened to me before I knew what Kundalini was, I'm working on this book of all of my experiences, and I'm going through it. I'm going, oh, that was Kundalini. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that was Kundalini. And I had no idea what it was at the time. I'm just like, this weird thing happened, and I went on to describe it. And of course, now I'm going, I know what that is.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of like how I am. I didn't know any of this until I started listening to to you and to Timothy Renner, and started listening to all these things, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not alone.
Yeah. And that's a good thing.
Yeah.
You're not alone, and you're not crazy.
Exactly. Yeah. I've been tested.
Yes, and that's also helpful. I mean, to know that, when a doctor looks at you and says there's nothing wrong with you, you're going, okay, we can rule that out, cross that off the list. I mean, that's what Whitley Strieber did. I mean, he thought he was, he had something wrong with his brain, so he went to the doctor. So, all right. Well, thank you for spending some time and sharing these stories.
Thank you. I feel kind of bad that I'm kind of drawing a blank. I feel like I'm missing some stuff, but I'll shoot you a message if I remember.
Okay. That would be fine. And Jo did remember, and she has done an extra segment that we're putting up for Patreons on a couple of other things that happened to her. So I hope you enjoyed that. If you have any stories you'd like to share, whether you want us to read them on the air or if you want to come on the show and talk about them, stories@wheredidtheroadgo.com is the best place to contact me for that. And we will see you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.